Today, we're unpacking one of the most dramatic, last-minute geopolitical pivots in recent memory. We are looking at a moment when the entire world essentially held its breath, expecting a massive military escalation in the Middle East, only for the brakes to be slammed on at the absolute 11th hour. We're going to cut right through the noise today and look exactly at what the source material tells us about the planned May 19th strike, that sudden pause, and the vastly different narratives coming out of Washington and Tehran.
And look, this isn't just speculation, guys. We have direct confirmation of how incredibly close the United States military actually came to launching a massive attack. The quote here is literally, "I was an hour away. We were all set to go. The ships are all loaded to the brim." It paints this intense picture of a military apparatus completely spun up, locked on targets, and just waiting for that final green light. The tension here is totally palpable, and it sets the stage for our entire analysis today. How exactly do you go from being 60 minutes away from war to just standing down?
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the aborted military strike. May 19th, the attack that didn't happen.
To really wrap our heads around that incredible U-turn, we've got to look at how rapidly this timeline developed and then how it completely unraveled. According to the reports, in the days just prior, top U.S. national security officials were deeply convened, evaluating kinetic military options against Iran amidst these steadily rising tensions. The expectation among several U.S. officials was that military action was essentially a total go, with strikes reportedly planned for May 19th. But then, right at the end, we hit that sudden, completely unexpected announcement from the White House pausing the action. Literally a last-minute halt. So the absolute crucial question becomes, what on earth triggered that pause?
Moving on to Section 2, the U.S. narrative, diplomacy and degraded capabilities. So what caused that last-minute halt? Well, honestly, that depends entirely on who you ask. The official narrative coming out of Washington points to three massive pillars of international diplomatic pressure that influenced this decision to pull back. First off, Arab leaders were reportedly sounding the alarm, warning Washington that an attack would absolutely trigger Iranian retaliation, specifically targeting vital oil facilities and critical infrastructure all across the Gulf. Second, Qatar actively stepped in, urging the U.S. to just hit pause and give diplomatic channels a little more time to work. And third, and this is highly significant, was an intervention involving China. President Xi Jinping reportedly promised not to send any weapons to Iran.
Now you might be wondering, why was China's involvement the real clincher here? Well, 40%. That is the massive chunk of oil that China imports from this specific region. The U.S. narrative suggests that because China relies so heavily on regional stability for its energy needs, Beijing has a major vested interest in keeping those international waterways open and conflict-free. So, a promise from China to withhold weapons from Iran? That's a massive diplomatic bargaining chip, giving the U.S. a strategic reason to pause and de-escalate the whole situation.
But hey, diplomacy was only half of the U.S. justification. The other half? It was a stark assessment of Iran's actual ability to fight back. The U.S. explicitly claimed that a staggering 82% of Iran's missile capacity is simply gone. This really represents Washington's stance that, hey, they aren't backing down from a formidable threat, but rather they're choosing not to engage an adversary whose primary offensive capabilities have already been severely depleted. Only 18% remaining is a pretty bold claim. And wow, that assessment goes way beyond just missiles. The U.S. asserts that Iranian manufacturing areas have been hit, their drone fleets are largely gone, and incredibly, they claim that the Iranian Navy and Air Force are, quote, completely gone. The ultimate takeaway from Washington's perspective is that it would literally take Iran 25 years to rebuild their forces. So the crucial point to remember here is that the U.S. narrative frames this pause not as a retreat, not at all, but as a heavily calculated decision made from a position of overwhelming strength against a weakened opponent. However, if you flip the geopolitical chessboard entirely, Tehran's interpretation of these exact same events couldn't be more different. While the U.S. claims they paused from a position of strength and for diplomacy, the Iranian view is blunt. They claim the U.S. paused out of pure fear of a massive, uncontainable retaliation. They completely 100% reject the narrative of a degraded Iranian military. Which brings us to Section 3, the Iranian warning, extra-regional retaliation. This is where we get into a much darker reality. To understand Tehran's mindset, we have to look to voices like senior lawmaker Ibrahim Azizi. His stance is a direct, total rejection of the American diplomatic storyline. He states unequivocally that Washington stepped back solely out of fear of a massive military response. In the source material, Azizi goes even further, claiming that power is literally the only language the U.S. understands. And he entirely dismisses the whole idea that Gulf Arab leaders mediating had any actual impact on the sudden pause in strikes.
But the rhetoric escalates, significantly, when we look at the official statements from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They issued this incredibly intense warning, stating, by repeating the enemy's aggression, we are making the war extra-regional. This isn't just a threat to defend their borders. No, this is a stated promise to fundamentally change the actual boundaries of the conflict itself.
We need to be absolutely crystal clear about what that term implies. An extra-regional war means the violence would not stay neatly contained within the Middle East. It's a doctrine that basically suggests if the U.S. strikes Iran, Iran is going to strike back in ways and in places that expand the theater of war globally. We're talking about potentially threatening foreign infrastructure or even foreign soil far, far away from the initial flashpoint. Breaking down the IRGC's full threat assessment, we're looking at a highly confident, incredibly aggressive posture. They warn that their adversaries simply haven't learned from past defeats. Crucially, they claim that in past skirmishes with the world's most expensive armies, Iran actually held back. They didn't use all capabilities. They are heavily hinting at unseen weapons here, promising crushing blows that will land enemies in black soil in unimaginable places. It is a bold declaration, in no uncertain terms, of a readiness to prove their power on the actual battlefield, not just in their rhetoric.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Regional Fallout and Alert. Israel prepares for escalation.
Look, when you have two heavily armed powers engaged in this level of high-stakes brinkmanship, one side claiming the other is totally degraded and the other threatening unimaginable global retaliation, it sends immediate shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. That sudden U-turn by the U.S. created incredible strategic uncertainty for its allies. According to reports from Channel 12, Israeli officials were reportedly caught completely off guard by the decision to delay the military action. And, when an ally fully expects a strike and it just doesn't happen, it forces an immediate, urgent recalibration of their own defense posture.
And let me tell you, that recalibration was incredibly rapid. Israel instantly initiated a strict escalation protocol. Step 1, they reportedly raised their military alert to the highest possible level. At the very same time, Step 2, Israeli Air Force units began preparing for immediate operations, basically standing ready just in case the U.S. strike plans resume. Moving to Step 3, U.S. and Israeli officials quickly completed a joint operational review specifically for possible future attacks on Iran. And finally, Step 4, turning the focus of military planners to intensely ensuring air superiority, just in the event this super fragile pause breaks and a major regional conflict actually erupts.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly profound question hanging over the entire region. Will the next strike be preemptive? The source material notes these really growing fears that with tensions running this high and the rhetoric being this aggressive, Iran might actually launch a preemptive strike if they believe a U.S. or Israeli attack is truly imminent. Think about it. We went from being 1 hour away from a massive strike to a tense, heavily armed standoff where both sides claim to absolutely have the upper hand. The May 19th attack didn't happen, but the underlying conditions for a massive, potentially extra-regional conflict, they remain fully intact. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this look into the source material helped clarify the intense dynamics at play here. Keep analyzing the facts, and I'll see you next time.